The town hall was packed with anticipation. Bright studio lights illuminated the grand stage where former President Donald Trump sat in his signature navy blue suit and red tie, exuding confidence as he prepared for yet another public confrontation. Across from him, a diverse audience filled the seats, a mixture of staunch supporters, skeptical liberals, and undecided Americans eager to witness the night's unfolding drama. Some had come expecting a fiery defense of Trump's legacy, while others were hoping to see him challenged in a way that no journalist or politician had managed before. But this night was different. Instead of facing a mainstream media figure or a career politician, Trump's challenger was James Carter, a decorated U.S. Marine veteran with an impeccable service record. He had served 22 years, completed multiple tours overseas, and witnessed firsthand the consequences of America's foreign policies. He had fought in wars that spanned different administrations, watched comrades die in battles that many believed were unnecessary, and returned home to a country that, in his eyes, had abandoned its veterans. And tonight, he wasn't here to shake hands. The moment the moderator handed him the microphone, Carter's grip tightened as if holding a rifle. His jaw clenched, and his piercing gaze locked onto Trump with an intensity that sent a wave of silence over the room. This wasn't a politician rehearsing talking points. This was a man with real grievances, deep wounds, and burning questions. "Mr. Trump," he began, his voice steady yet sharp. "I wore this uniform for 22 years. I fought for America, not for Democrats, not for Republicans, but for the country we were promised. The country you claimed you would fight for." A hush fell over the audience. Some stiffened in their seats, recognizing the weight of his words. Others exchanged glances, unsure of where this was headed. Trump remained composed, leaning back slightly, the hint of a smirk playing on his lips. A trademark of a man who had been in countless verbal battles before. But Carter wasn't intimidated. "You ran on America first," he continued, his voice rising. "You told us you'd bring back jobs, that you'd stop the endless wars, that you'd stand up for veterans. But once you got into office, what did you do?" The tension in the room thickened. Supporters began murmuring, some nodding in agreement, while others clenched their fists, bracing for the clash that was about to unfold. Trump raised an eyebrow, finally breaking his silence. "Here it comes," he muttered, barely audible. Carter's next words would ignite a battle unlike any Trump had faced before. As the room fell silent, James Carter tightened his grip on the microphone, his voice unwavering. He had waited years for this moment, and he wasn't about to waste it. His eyes locked onto Trump, not with the awe or reverence that many brought into these town hall meetings, but with a burning disappointment, a frustration forged on the battlefields where he had fought for a country he barely recognized anymore. "You ran on America first," Carter repeated, his voice steady but laced with anger. "You told us you'd bring back jobs, stop the endless wars, and stand up for veterans. But once you got into office, what did you do?" A few cheers erupted from the crowd, mixed with jeers from Trump's loyal supporters. The divide in the room was palpable. Trump, however, remained still, his smirk unwavering, as if amused by the challenge before him. Carter continued, his tone rising. "You gave billions in contracts to the same defense contractors you said were robbing this country blind. You promised to end endless wars, but you pumped even more money into the war machine. And what about the soldiers who actually fought? The veterans who came home broken, struggling to find work, buried in medical bills, what did you do for them?" Murmurs rippled through the audience. Some nodded in agreement, others shook their heads, unwilling to accept the accusation. But Carter wasn't done. "And now you want to talk about border security?" he scoffed, shaking his head. "You promised to get rid of criminals, but instead, you ripped families apart, deporting hard-working immigrants who built this country. That's not America first. That's America last." The tension in the room grew thicker. Some of Trump's supporters shouted in protest, while others sat frozen, waiting to see how their leader would respond. The weight of Carter's words filled the space, pressing against Trump like an unmovable force. For the first time that night, Trump leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his expression unreadable. His fingers tapped rhythmically against the surface, a slow, calculated movement. Then, finally, he spoke. "Are you done?" he asked, his voice casual, almost amused. Carter's jaw tightened. "No, Mr. President," he said, his voice cold. "I'm just getting started." The room erupted. Some cheered, others booed, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just a debate. This was a war of words, of ideology, of what America had become versus what it was meant to be. As the tension in the room thickened, Trump leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his expression unreadable. The cheers and boos from the crowd had begun to settle, and now, all eyes were on him. He had let Carter have his moment, let him unload his anger, let him throw out his accusations. But now, it was Trump's turn. He smirked, tilting his head slightly. "You done?" he asked, his voice smooth, casual, almost amused. Carter's fists clenched at his sides. "No, Mr. President, I'm just getting started." Trump nodded slowly, letting the silence hang between them for just a beat longer than comfortable. Then, he spoke. "You want to blame me for everything, Colonel? Fine. But let's talk facts." His voice was steady, deliberate, cutting through the room like a knife. "You say I sat in my gold tower while guys like you bled in the sand? Tell me, Colonel, which president sent you there?" The audience fell dead silent. Carter's jaw tensed, his grip on the microphone tightening. "You weren't fighting my war," Trump continued, his eyes locked onto Carter's. "You were fighting theirs." The words landed like a punch. Carter knew exactly what Trump meant. The Bushes, the Clintons, the Obamas. Presidents who had kept America in endless wars, sending men like Carter to fight battles that never seemed to end. Trump pressed on, his voice lower now, more intense. "I didn't put you there, Colonel. But I fought like hell to bring you back." The room erupted. Some people jumped to their feet cheering, others booed loudly, furious. Carter's breathing was ragged now, his shoulders rising and falling as he struggled to contain his anger. Trump didn't blink. "And tell me, Colonel," he continued, his voice dripping with confidence, "how many times did you fight a war that Congress actually voted for? How many times did you watch billion-dollar defense deals get signed while you were out there bleeding for this country?" Carter knew the answer. The crowd knew the answer. Trump leaned in closer, his voice now a whisper that somehow carried across the entire room. "You think I was part of that club?" he asked. "No, Colonel, I was the only one who ever fought against it." The crowd exploded again, the room divided between those who cheered and those who jeered. But Trump wasn't done. He leaned back in his chair, his smirk widening. "You say I let America down. You say I didn't fight hard enough. But let me ask you something, Colonel. Where were you when they tried to stop me?" Carter's nostrils flared. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. Trump saw it. He had him. And the tide had turned. The tension in the room was palpable. Carter could feel the weight of every gaze, the anticipation of the audience hanging in the air like an impending storm. Trump had just delivered a devastating counterattack, turning the blame away from himself and pointing it directly at the Washington establishment. For a moment, Carter had been stunned, caught off guard by the sheer force of Trump's words. But he wasn't done. Not yet. Taking a deep breath, Carter tightened his grip on the microphone, his knuckles white. He locked eyes with Trump, his jaw clenched. "You think you can just deflect all responsibility, Mr. President?" His voice was sharp, his frustration evident. "You talk a big game about fighting the swamp, but you became the swamp. You promised to drain it, but you filled your administration with the same war-hungry billionaires you swore to fight." A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. Some clapped, others jeered. Trump remained unmoved, watching Carter with a knowing smirk. "And let's talk about the border," Carter pressed on, his voice rising. "You act like you were protecting America, but tell me something. When you separated families, when you threw innocent kids into detention centers, was that America first?" The crowd erupted, split between outrage and applause. Carter could see some in the audience nodding in agreement, while others shouted him down. But he didn't care. He was fighting for something bigger than this moment, bigger than politics. Trump, however, remained calm, composed, too composed. He exhaled slowly, tapping his fingers against the table, his eyes locked onto Carter with an intensity that made the veteran's pulse quicken. He wasn't rattled. If anything, he looked amused. Carter knew this wasn't just a political debate anymore. This was personal. "I fought for this country," Carter continued, his voice steadier now, harder. "Not for a flag, not for a party, but for the people. And I will not sit here and let you pretend that you fought for them too." The words hit like a bomb. The room shook with the energy of the moment. Trump's expression finally changed, his smirk flickering, just for a second. Carter saw it, and for the first time that night, he thought he might be winning. But then, Trump smiled. A slow, deliberate smirk. And just like that, Carter felt the momentum slip through his fingers. Just when Carter thought he had gained the upper hand, Trump shifted gears. He had been on the defensive, allowing Carter to fire his shots, to vent his frustration, to pour his anger into the microphone. But now, it was Trump's turn to attack. With a slow, deliberate motion, Trump leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His expression was no longer amused, it was calculated. He tilted his head slightly, studying Carter like a seasoned fighter who had just lured his opponent into a trap. "You done?" Trump asked, his voice low and steady. Carter didn't flinch. "I've said what I came to say." Trump nodded slowly, then exhaled. "Good. Because now it's my turn." The room fell silent. The audience, moments ago loud and divided, now hung on Trump's every word. He had them. And Carter? Carter felt a sinking sensation in his stomach. Trump straightened his tie, then spoke. "You say I let America down? You say I didn't fight hard enough? Let me ask you something, Colonel. Where were you when they tried to stop me?" Carter's brow furrowed, but before he could respond, Trump pressed on. "Where were you when they sabotaged the wall? When they blocked every attempt I made to drain the swamp? When the media twisted my every word?" He shook his head. "You want to blame me? Fine. But be honest. Were you fighting against the problem, or were you helping it?" A ripple of gasps spread through the audience. Carter's jaw tightened, his fists clenching. He could feel the tide turning. Then Trump went in for the kill shot. "You say real Americans are still waiting for me to be the man I promised I'd be," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. A pause. A long, suffocating pause. Then Trump leaned in closer. "Guess what, Colonel?" Another pause. "They're still waiting for you too." Boom. The crowd exploded. Some cheered wildly, others booed, but it didn't matter. The energy had shifted completely. Carter's mouth opened slightly, then closed. No comeback, no counterattack. Just silence. Trump sat back, adjusting his cufflinks. "Debate's over, Colonel." And just like that, he had won. The moment the debate began slipping away from him, Carter felt it in his gut. He had entered the town hall with fire in his eyes, determined to confront Trump, to expose what he saw as hypocrisy, to hold him accountable. But now, under the relentless weight of Trump's strategic offense, he was losing his grip. Trump's last words had been a direct hit, not just politically, but personally. "Guess what, Colonel? They're still waiting for you too." The words rang in Carter's head, louder than the cheers and jeers from the divided audience. His fists clenched around the microphone. His chest rose and fell rapidly. The controlled, disciplined Marine who had spent decades facing danger with unwavering composure was now shaking with frustration. Trump had baited him into a corner, and he knew it. And yet, he couldn't stop himself from stepping right into the trap. "You're full of it, Trump," Carter barked, his voice cutting through the air like a gunshot. "You pretend to be an outsider, a fighter, but you took money from the same people you swore you'd take down. You sat in your golden tower while guys like me were bleeding in the sand. You don't care about America, you care about power." The crowd erupted. Some cheered, others booed, but the energy was shifting again. Not in Carter's favor. Trump? He didn't move. He didn't blink. And then, he laughed. Not a loud, mocking laugh. Not an exaggerated cackle. Just a low, knowing chuckle. And that was worse than any insult. Carter's eyes widened, his face turning red with rage. He had just lost control, and Trump knew it. "There it is," Trump said smoothly, shaking his head. "The moment you lose." Carter stiffened. "What the hell are you talking about?" Trump leaned forward, his voice deadly calm. "The moment you stop debating, and start yelling." A hush fell over the crowd. "You lost your temper," Trump continued, his voice like a blade cutting through Carter's fury. "And now you've lost the argument." Boom. The audience gasped. Some nodded in agreement, others gritted their teeth in frustration. But Carter? He felt the weight of the moment crushing down on him. Trump sat back, adjusting his tie like a man who had already won. "You're a soldier, Colonel," he said, his tone almost sympathetic. "You should know better than anyone. The one who loses control is the one who loses the war." Carter swallowed hard. Because deep down, he knew Trump was right. As the dust settled in the heated town hall, the energy in the room was undeniable. The audience was divided, some standing and cheering for Carter, others fiercely backing Trump. But in the center of it all, Donald Trump sat completely still, his hands resting lightly on the table, his face unreadable. He had let Carter throw everything he had, allowed him to unleash his rage, frustration, and accusations, and now, it was his turn to end it. With a slow, deliberate motion, Trump leaned forward, locking his gaze onto Carter like a hunter zeroing in on his prey. "You call me a liar," Trump said, his voice low and cutting through the noise like a scalpel. "A sellout. A man who became the very thing I swore to fight." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Let me explain something to you, Colonel." The room fell silent. I walked into Washington as an outsider. Trump's voice was measured, unwavering. I was never supposed to win. The system, the swamp, hated me from day one. They fought me every single step of the way. They blocked every attempt I made to fix this country. He paused. You know why? Another pause. The audience hung on his words. Because I wasn't one of them. Carter's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenching, but he said nothing. You talk about war like you're the only one who understands sacrifice. Trump continued, his voice dropping lower, more intense. I fought a different kind of war, Colonel. One you didn't see. A war that wasn't fought with bullets, but with power. He let the words linger before delivering the final blow. And let me tell you something. I won. The crowd erupted. Some roared in approval, others shouted in frustration, but one thing was clear, Trump had seized control of the moment. Carter's fingers curled tightly around the microphone, his breathing ragged, but he was silent. Trump wasn't finished. You say I let America down, you say I didn't fight hard enough. He tilted his head, eyes locked onto Carter like a sniper. Let me ask you something, Colonel. Trump's voice dropped to a near whisper, but it carried like a bomb in the charged room. Where were you when they tried to stop me? Carter's expression darkened, his body tense. Where were you? Trump continued, never breaking eye contact. When they sabotaged the wall? When they blocked every attempt I made to drain the swamp? When the media twisted my every word? Trump shook his head, then leaned in closer. You want to blame me? He said, his voice like steel. Fine. A pause. But be honest. Another pause. You weren't fighting against the problem. You were helping it. Boom. Carter's fists clenched, his face reddening, but he had no words left. Trump saw it. The crowd saw it. And that was all he needed. Trump stood up, adjusting his tie, his signature smirk making its way onto his face. Debate's over, he declared. The audience exploded. Some cheering wildly, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Carter sat completely still, his hands still clenched into fists. His chest rising and falling, his mind racing, but deep down, he knew. Trump had won. Again. The town hall debate between Donald Trump and Colonel K. James Carter was more than just a fiery exchange of words. It was a battle of ideologies, a moment that exposed deeper conflicts within America. At its core, the debate revolved around four major themes. Patriotism and leadership, government accountability, the power of political institutions, and the struggle between emotion and control. First, the theme of patriotism and leadership was central to Carter's passionate challenge. As a decorated Marine veteran, he embodied the sacrifice and dedication of American soldiers who served their country without political bias. He questioned Trump's commitment to the military, demanding to know why veterans still struggled with medical bills and unemployment despite promises of reform. Trump, however, countered by redefining what it meant to be a leader, not just someone who fights on the battlefield but someone who takes on the political establishment that profits from endless wars. In his response, Trump painted himself as the outsider who fought against Washington, shifting the conversation from Carter's personal sacrifice to the broader war against corruption. Another powerful theme was government accountability. Carter accused Trump of failing to fulfill his promises, of strengthening the same defense contractors and political insiders he had vowed to take down. But Trump turned the argument back on Carter, highlighting the deep-rooted bureaucracy that resists reform at every turn. He challenged the audience to consider who truly controlled Washington and whether one man, even a president, could single-handedly dismantle a system designed to resist change. This exchange resonated with voters who were skeptical of both politicians and the military-industrial complex. A third theme that emerged was the power of political institutions. Trump's mention of the swamp and the deep state reinforced the idea that there were hidden forces working against progress. Carter, despite his fierce criticisms, found himself in a difficult position, because, in questioning Trump's effectiveness, he indirectly acknowledged the influence of these forces. Trump's argument was clear, he had fought, but Washington fought back harder. Whether one agreed with him or not, the debate underscored a harsh reality. True reform is nearly impossible when the system itself is designed to preserve its power. Finally, the debate highlighted the struggle between emotion and control. Carter, driven by personal grievances and frustration, lost his composure as the discussion grew heated. Trump, on the other hand, remained calculated, never letting the moment overwhelm him. In the end, it wasn't just about the facts or policies, it was about who controlled the narrative. By maintaining his calm and strategically shifting the conversation, Trump secured his victory not just in words, but in perception. Ultimately, this debate served as a microcosm of modern American politics. A clash between ideals and pragmatism, between personal sacrifice and political maneuvering, between raw emotion and calculated control. The audience saw not just a debate but a power struggle that defined the future of leadership in America. As the debate drew to a close, the outcome was unmistakable. Trump had won, and Carter had lost control. What began as a fiery confrontation between the former president and a decorated Marine veteran had transformed into a masterclass in political strategy, with Trump turning every attack into an opportunity. While Carter had entered the debate armed with passion, frustration, and an unshakable sense of betrayal, he ultimately fell into a trap that many before him had encountered. He underestimated Trump's ability to control the battlefield, even when under attack. Carter had come in strong, demanding accountability, questioning Trump's failures, and highlighting the struggles of veterans who had been neglected. His words were sharp, his voice filled with raw emotion, and for a moment, it seemed as if he was gaining the upper hand. The audience was divided. Some cheered him on, while others booed, calling him a traitor. But Trump did not react emotionally. Instead, he listened, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. When Carter lost his temper, Trump remained composed. He let Carter's anger consume him, watching as his opponent's frustration turned into reckless aggression. With one calculated move, Trump flipped the conversation on its head, shifting the blame from himself to the establishment, the deep state, and the corrupt political elites who had long controlled Washington. By doing so, he repositioned himself as a fighter against the system rather than a part of it, forcing Carter into a defensive position. The turning point came when Trump accused Carter of fighting the wrong enemy. He reminded him, and the audience, that the wars Carter had fought in were not of Trump's making, but the result of decisions made by past presidents, both Republican and Democrat. In that moment, Carter hesitated, a critical mistake. His silence spoke louder than words. He knew that Trump had successfully reframed the debate, moving it away from personal attacks and onto the broader issue of systemic failure. As the final moments unfolded, Carter tried one last desperate attack, calling Trump a fraud, a liar, and a man who had sold the American people a false dream. But Trump, calm and calculated, simply smirked and delivered his final blow, reminding Carter that real Americans were still waiting for him to be the leader he claimed to be. The words landed like a punch, leaving Carter visibly shaken. The crowd erupted, some in support, others in frustration. But the verdict was clear. Trump had dominated the debate. He had taken every attack, absorbed it, redirected it, and ultimately controlled the outcome. Carter, despite his righteous anger, had fallen into the same trap as countless others before him. He had let emotion overpower strategy. As Trump stood from his seat, the debate was over. Carter remained still, his fists clenched, knowing that, despite all his efforts, he had just lost a battle he thought he had already won. In life, passion alone is not enough to win a battle, whether it be in politics, personal relationships, or professional endeavors. The debate between Trump and Carter serves as a reminder that strategy, composure, and adaptability are often more powerful than sheer emotion. Carter entered the discussion with righteous anger and a deep sense of betrayal, yet his loss of control ultimately led to his downfall. Meanwhile, Trump remained calm, calculated, and focused, proving that a composed mind can outmaneuver even the most passionate opponent. For older audiences who have witnessed decades of political and social change, this lesson is even more relevant. Experience teaches us that emotional reactions rarely lead to lasting solutions. Instead, careful planning, patience, and understanding the true nature of a problem are what create real change. In family discussions, debates about societal issues, or even conflicts in daily life, it is wise to listen carefully, choose words wisely, and avoid being consumed by frustration. At the end of the day, wisdom outweighs impulse. Those who can stay composed, think critically, and respond with precision will always have the advantage. A strong mind, not a loud voice, wins the war.